The piano sat in the corner of the Last Chance Saloon like a coffin waiting for a body to fall into it. Every night for 11 months, Lou Marsh had played it, and every night she had tucked the little nickel-plated Colt beneath the fallboard before she sat down. Nobody noticed. Nobody ever noticed her. She was a slight woman, somewhere past 30 and short of 40. With brown hair she kept pinned tight against her skull and hands that never seemed to stop moving. The miners tipped her in copper. The drifters tipped her in nothing. The barkeep tipped her in gin she poured off into a tin cup behind the bar when nobody was looking. She was furniture. She was wallpaper. She was the kind of woman men forgot was in the room the moment they started talking about what they had really done. And she had come 1,000 miles to be forgot, because the kind of woman nobody notices is the kind of woman who hears everything. That was the reason she had come to Copper Falls in the first place. Before we go further, settle in wherever you are tonight. The stove on, the door shut, the rain, or the quiet. Let us know in the comments where you are listening from. We love knowing who is keeping us company. Harlan Voss owned everything in the county that could be owned and most of what could not. He had not always owned it. 11 years earlier, he had owned nothing but a fast horse and a faster mouth. Then he had ridden down from Cheyenne with 2 men behind him and an idea in his head, and now his brand was on 30,000 head, and his name was on every loan in town. Men who could not pay him worked for him. Girls who could not pay him worked for him. The ones who refused did not stay long enough to be remembered by anybody but the lamplighter, who turned their lights out for the last time. She had known one of the ones who refused. His name had been Will Marsh. He was her younger brother, and he had been 19 the summer. He came home whistling with a pocket full of coins, and what he swore was a story that would set the both of them up for good. He had not stolen anything. He had been paid $2 by a man whose name he had told only Lou to drive a steer from one pasture to another before dawn. By the time the sun was up, the steer was missing and Voss's man was sworn on a Bible that he had seen young Will Marsh leading it off in the dark. The judge had been a Voss man. The jury had been a Voss jury, and Will could not pay the kind of money that bought a different judge. Lou had begged. She had borrowed. She had walked to the jailhouse barefoot in the rain, and the door had been shut against her. She had stood at the back of the crowd when they put the noose over her brother's neck. She had carried the sound of his last breath in her chest for 11 years. Then she had bought a piano from a widow in Kansas for $12, packed the nickel-plated Colt she had bought from the same widow for $3 more, and started riding west. She arrived in Copper Falls on a Tuesday in October, the kind of afternoon when the sun hit the mountains at exactly the right angle to make them look like they were on fire. She played one song at the audition, then another. The barkeep, a man named Reggie who had the calm of a sheep and the brains of one, offered her room and board in exchange for 3 sets a night and the quiet that a woman at a piano brought to a room full of men who had nothing gentle left in their lives. She took the job. She tucked the gun beneath the keys. And she began, slowly, to listen. The town was small enough that a man's secrets could not stay secret for long, and large enough that a woman at a piano could hear most of them. Voss's men came into the Last Chance every Thursday. They drank bourbon. They lied about their women, and they boasted about the things they had done in Voss's name that the law never touched. Lou played on. She nodded. She smiled when the men tipped her hat. She was so small, so constant, so unthreatening, that the men forgot she had ears at all. And every Friday morning, in the tiny room behind the boarding house that Reggie had lent her for the price of playing his saloon 6 nights a week, she wrote down what she had heard in a ledger she had bought from the same widow who had sold her the gun. The ledger had names in it. Dates, numbers of cattle, names of burned homesteads, names of men who had been paid to disappear. By the time the snow came that first winter, the ledger had 43 pages. By the time the snow went, it had 81. She did not let herself be in a hurry. The dead cannot put back the breath they lost. But she had learned, in the long quiet of those first months, that the man getting away clean is the man who moves too soon. The man who watches and waits and listens is the man who gets to choose his moment. She was waiting for her moment. That winter a new man came to town. His name was Caleb Thorne, and he had been a deputy sheriff in Colorado before the territorial legislature had downsized his whole county for the price of a postage stamp. He had come down looking for work and found a badge, because the previous sheriff of Copper Falls had been promoted to the county seat after he stopped asking any questions that Voss did not want asked. Caleb was younger than Lou by maybe 3 years, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of the same wood as the mountains, and a habit of not speaking until he had thought about what he was going to say. He took his coffee black. He slept 4 hours a night. He walked the perimeter of the town twice before he learned the streets, and 3 times before he learned the people. He came into the Last Chance one Thursday in February. He ordered a whiskey he did not drink. He listened while Voss's men talked about a new calf count that had come up short and a new rancher named Otis Bream who had run a fence across the wrong stretch of grass. He set his glass down when Lou played something slow, and he kept his eyes on the men across the room. The men noticed and stopped boasting, then noticed that nobody else had noticed and went on boasting in lower voices. Which was worse? Lou saw him. She saw him see them. And she felt, for the first time in 11 years, the cold, strange click in her chest that told her the wind had finally changed. The question, of course, was whether to trust him with what she had. A sheriff in a town like Copper Falls lasted about as long as a hatchet in a hardwood. She had watched 3 of them come and go. Each had come in believing he would be the one to set things right. Each had stopped believing some smaller thing first, a bribe that he called a loan, a wife that kept him comfortable, a single night he chose not to see. She could not afford to be wrong about this one. The ledger was her brother's life, and she would not gamble his memory on the first clean face that came through the door. But Caleb kept coming back. He came back on Thursdays when Voss's men were loud. He came back on Sundays when the room was empty and the barkeep switched out the lamps, and he sat in the corner and listened to her play for 2 hours and never said a word about it. He came back one Tuesday in March with blood on his cuff and a story about a man who had tried to run him off the road, and he took her aside in the alley behind the saloon and said, "Miss Marsh, I have a problem I need some music to drown out. Can I trouble you for a song?" She played him something slow and watched his shoulders come down by an inch. Then she opened the fallboard, lifted out the little nickel-plated Colt, set it on the bar between them, and told him her brother's name. He listened. He did not interrupt. When she was done, he picked up the gun, turned it over in his hand, and said, "How many rounds you keep in this thing?" "5," she said. "6, counting the one in the chamber." "How many in the ledger?" 81 pages worth. "Then we have some reading to do." "What would you have done in her place? Would you have trusted him with your brother's name and the only weapon you owned?" They read the ledger by candlelight in her room on Sunday nights for the next 2 months. Caleb cross-referenced each name down to its writer and its date. Lou traced each date back to the man it had cost something. They built, between them, the shape of what Harlan Voss had done. Not from gossip, not from drunken boasts in the saloon, but from the steady witness of a woman who had sat still and paid attention for 11 months and wrote down, in her own small hand, what she saw. It turned out Voss had not just framed one young man 13 years ago. He had framed a dozen. He had burned 4 homesteads that resisted him and watched the families drive away in the snow. He had paid the previous sheriff to look the other way, and the one before that, and the one before that. He had signed, in his own hand on county letterhead, a list of men to be arrested for crimes they could not possibly have committed because they had been in bed with their wives or on a train 300 miles away when those crimes were done. Lou had a brother at the top of that list. She had been waiting 13 years to lay the page down. When the spring came the second time, Caleb got word from a friend in Denver that the territorial governor was sending an investigator north to look into the land disputes along Voss's range. The investigator was due the second week of May. Caleb went to Lou with the plan on a Wednesday night. With rain coming down so hard the gutters ran over and the tin awning over the saloon sounded like a drum. "We bring him the ledger," he said. "We bring him the signatures. We bring him the 3 witnesses who are still alive and willing to talk. And we let the man build his own cage out of his own hand. And if he gets wind of it first," Lou said, "then you do what you have been practicing for." She nodded. Then she played him something quiet, almost a lullaby, the kind of song that did not sound like a war coming, but felt like one all the same. The trouble was that Voss did get wind of it. He had a man inside Caleb's office, the deputy, a quiet boy named Hoke who could have been a good lawman if he had been raised by anyone but Voss. Hoke heard what Caleb was doing and sent a rider out that same night with a letter sealed in wax, riding south, riding hard. Lou caught the rider at the river ford. She had been there since sundown because Caleb had thought the same thing and asked her to watch the water. The rider was younger than her by 20 years and twice her size, but he had not expected a saloon pianist to step out of the willows with a nickel-plated Colt aimed at his chest and a hand as steady as a hitching post. Her voice was what broke him. It was not loud. It was not shaking. It said, "Lower the letter. Ride back to your horse. Tell your boss I said the second week in May." The boy did. The second week of May arrived on a Monday. The investigator arrived at noon with a driver and 2 clerks and a satchel of papers. Caleb met him at the stage office. Lou waited at the saloon with her hands on the keys. Voss rode in from the south at the head of 8 men and stopped his horse in the middle of Main Street and hollered that if any man in the town touched his business, he would hang him from the hotel balcony before supper. Caleb stepped out of the stage office with the ledger in one hand and the letter with the wax seal in the other, and he read Voss's name aloud on the first page. Then he read the second page, then the third. Lou could hear him all the way down the block because the street was so quiet you could have heard a tap drip onto the wood of the boardwalk. Voss drew. Caleb had been waiting for it. He had been waiting for years. The shot that took Voss out of the saddle came not from Caleb's gun, but from the little Colt in Lou's hand. She had stepped out the side door of the Last Chance, and the gun had been steady, and the shot had gone exactly where she had told it to go for 13 years, into the forearm Voss had used to sign the paper that took her brother's life. The other 7 men watched their boss drop and held their fire. They had been promised a legend. They had not been promised a woman. Voss went down hard. The bullet cracked the bone. The pain pulled the breath out of him and put it on the porch of the hotel, where it turned his face gray ashen. Caleb picked up Voss's fallen gun and read him the rest of the document. Then he arrested him, right there, in front of the whole town. If this story is moving you, you are exactly who we wrote it for. A like and a subscribe tells us to keep going. The trial was held in September in the territorial capital. The investigator took the ledger and the 8 witnesses and the letter with the wax seal and the boy from the river ford and Voss's own signature on the cattle receipts and walked into the courtroom with a stack of papers 4 inches thick. The jury came back in 40 minutes. Guilty on every count. 23 years at hard labor. The brand on the cattle was stripped from Voss's name and put in the public record as stolen. The homesteaders whose ranches had been burned were paid from the confiscated estate in installments over the next 4 years. The boy Hoke turned state's evidence for a reduced sentence and disappeared into Montana. The widow who had sold Lou the piano never knew what her $12 instrument had been hiding between its keys. Will Marsh's name was cleared on the second day of the trial. The clerk read it aloud. There was a minute of silence while the people in the gallery looked at Lou, who was sitting in the back row with her hat in her lap and her hands folded together the way she had held them the day they put the rope around her brother's neck. She had carried the weight of his death alone for 13 years. Now, in a room full of strangers, she set it down. After the trial, Caleb walked Lou back to the boarding house in Copper Falls. The snow was coming early that year, and the wind had a cold bite to it. She had left the little Colt on the judge's bench. She would not carry it again. "You ought to teach," Caleb said as they walked. "There are half a dozen girls in this town who play the saloon uprights for a quarter a set, and they could be playing something finer." "I am going to," she said. "I have already got a student. There is a girl who works the millinery who has hands like her mother's and none of her mother's fear." "What is her name?" "Margie. She is 12. He walked her to the door. He did not take her arm. He did not try to touch her in any way that was not in her power to refuse. He stood on the step and said, "Miss Marsh." "Lou, if a man ever said the wrong thing about your brother in front of you, I would expect him to lose that argument. What I want to know is what the right thing is, so I can say it." She looked at him for a long minute. Then she said, "You could say I never made the second week of May wait any longer than it had to." He nodded. He took his hat off and held it against his chest the way her father used to hold his when he was about to leave a room. "I will say that," he said, "whenever it is needed. Good night, Lou." "Good night, Caleb." She watched him walk down the street. She watched the lamplighter come out and light the gas lamps one by one. She went inside and sat at the upright piano in her rented room and played a song that was not a lullaby and was not a hymn and was not a march. She just played it because she had forgotten what her hands were for when they were not hiding something, and she wanted to remember. She played until the candle burned low. Then she let the music go quiet and sat with her hands at rest on the keys, as if for the first time they were only hands, and nothing more, and that was enough. The town had a teacher of music the following spring. Lou opened a small studio above the feed store, where the light came in sideways all afternoon and smelled like hay and sweet oil. Margie was her first student. By the end of the first year, she had 4 more. By the end of the second, she had 11, and the Last Chance had a proper upright piano, and Reggie had retired to a smaller saloon in Kansas where the men did not boast about what they had done. Caleb went on being sheriff. He married a girl from the next county who had a laugh that could be heard over a gunshot. Lou went to the wedding and cried in the church lobby for 10 minutes, and then went home and played the piano until the rain stopped. Harlan Voss died in the penitentiary in his 7th year. He went out the way he had come in, small and quiet and unmentioned. The epilogue belongs to a different night, 15 years later. They had strung paper lanterns along the rail of the new bandstand in the center of town because the harvest had finally come in clean and the cattle count had finally come in honest, and the brand that had hung over Lou Marsh's life for 13 years had been struck from the books forever. Lou sat at the upright piano in the bandstand, and Margie sat beside her, 27 years old now, with her mother's hands and none of her mother's fear. There were 31 children waiting in 2 rows with violin cases and clarinets and small drums, and behind them the entire town of Copper Falls stood listening to the first music the town had ever played that it had not stolen from somebody else. Lou played the first 3 notes of a song her brother had whistled the summer he came home with a pocket full of coins. Then she stopped. She put her hand on Margie's wrist. "Now you finish it," she said, and Margie did. "Next, we will tell the story of a deaf woman who was sent to a remote ranch because her family was ashamed of her, and the blind rancher who could see her worth from the moment she arrived. Catch you next time."